The champagne glass trembled in Marcus Hartwell's hand, the golden liquid catching the light from 1,000 crystal chandeliers overhead. Around him, 200 guests, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, murmured their congratulations, their voices blending into a suffocating hum of polite celebration that pressed against his ears like white noise. The grand ballroom of the Ashford estate sparkled with all the trappings of wealth and status. White roses cascaded from every corner, their petals perfect and uniform, arranged by a florist who charged more for this evening's flowers than most people earned in a year. A string quartet sat in the corner, playing something delicate and forgettable. The kind of classical piece that wealthy people assumed indicated good taste. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided between guests with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost $50 per bite. It was exactly the kind of event Marcus Hartwell had learned to endure over his 52 years. Exactly the kind of performance that came with being worth $3.8 billion. But Marcus couldn't hear the music, couldn't taste the champagne, couldn't focus on any of the congratulations being offered to him. The man of the hour, the billionaire tech founder who'd somehow convinced an incredible woman to marry him. Because his eyes were locked on something, someone 15 feet away, that made his chest tighten with a pain so sharp he could barely breathe. Elena, his fiancée, stood with her back partially turned to him, speaking softly to a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The child had dark curls that refused to stay combed, a skinny frame that was all elbows and knees and boundless energy. And he clutched a small wooden toy car in both hands like it was treasure. The kind of toy car Marcus used to buy for his son. The kind that had been buried with him 8 years ago. Marcus felt his knees go weak, felt the ballroom spin slightly around him. Because this boy, this child Elena was speaking to so gently, with such obvious affection, looked exactly like Christopher. The same unruly dark hair that no amount of combing could tame. The same wide, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything with wonder. The same slight gap between his front teeth when he smiled. Even the way he held that toy car, with both hands pressed together like he was protecting something precious, was exactly how Christopher used to hold his toys. "Sir?" A voice cut through Marcus's paralysis. Daniel, his personal assistant of 8 years, appeared at his elbow, his expression carefully neutral, but his voice tight with concern. "The photographer is asking for the couple's shot. Everyone's waiting." Marcus blinked, trying to force himself to look away from the boy, from Elena, from this scene that felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until he couldn't breathe. He turned mechanically to face his assistant. "Tell them to wait," Marcus managed to say, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended. Daniel hesitated, glancing toward where Elena stood with the child, then back to Marcus. He'd been with Marcus long enough to read the signs of an impending breakdown. "Sir, it's your engagement party. The guests are expecting—" "I know what it is," Marcus cut him off, not unkindly. "I know what they're expecting. Just tell them to wait, please." Daniel studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded once, sharply, and disappeared back into the crowd to make excuses to the photographer, to the event coordinator, to whoever else was waiting for the happy couple to perform their happiness for the cameras. Marcus turned back to watch Elena and the boy, his hand gripping the champagne flute so tightly he was surprised the delicate crystal didn't shatter. But did he really know what this was? Did he understand what was happening here? 2 months ago, Marcus Hartwell had been a man who trusted absolutely no one, a self-made billionaire who'd built a technology empire from nothing but code and ruthless calculation, who'd learned through painful experience that people didn't see Marcus Hartwell the person. They saw Marcus Hartwell the bank account, Marcus Hartwell the opportunity, Marcus Hartwell the ticket to a better life. After his son Christopher died 8 years ago, killed instantly in a car accident that Marcus hadn't been present for because he'd been too busy closing a business deal to pick his son up from school himself, Marcus had built walls around himself so high and so thick that no one could get through. He'd told himself it was self-preservation, that if he never let anyone close enough to matter, then he'd never have to feel that kind of devastating loss again. And then 6 months ago, Elena Carter had walked into his life. Not walked, really. She'd already been there, quietly working as his housekeeper, moving through his pristine penthouse like a warm breeze through a tomb. She hummed Beatles songs off-key while she worked. She argued with him about the proper way to load a dishwasher with the same passionate intensity most people reserved for political debates. She'd once threatened to quit because he'd reorganized her carefully arranged spice cabinet according to alphabetical order instead of her system, which she'd informed him was organized by frequency of use and flavor profile compatibility. Whatever that meant. Elena Carter, who called him Mr. Hartwell in a tone that somehow managed to sound both respectful and like she was gently mocking him. Elena Carter, who left him notes in the kitchen when she knew he'd worked late. "There's pasta in the fridge. Actually eat it instead of just having coffee for dinner. And yes, I can tell when you don't eat it, so don't bother lying." Elena Carter, who had somehow slipped past every single one of his carefully constructed defenses without even trying. And then, 2 months ago, Marcus had done what he always did when he started to care about someone. He'd tested her. He'd given Elena a black credit card with no spending limit, along with 2 other women in his life. Victoria Sterling, the elegant real estate mogul who'd been circling him for years, and Isabel Chen, his brilliant corporate strategist who understood business the way most people understood breathing. He'd given all 3 of them the same thing: unlimited funds for 3 days, no strings attached, no explanations required. It had been, he told himself, a behavioral experiment, a way to see who these women really were when given unlimited power and no consequences, a way to determine who actually cared about him versus who just cared about his money. Victoria had spent nearly $94,000 on a strategic networking event that was really just an excuse to advance her own business interests while looking generous. Isabel had spent $67,000 on funding her own startup and promptly given her notice, essentially using his test as seed capital for becoming his competitor. Both women had proven exactly what Marcus expected, that everyone had an agenda, everyone had a price, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But Elena Carter had taken that unlimited credit card and spent $30,000 buying 300 hot dogs, winter coats for 50 orphan children, educational supplies for a struggling children's home, and setting up small college funds, $60 each, for every single child at Harbor Lights Orphanage. She hadn't spent a single dollar on herself, not one coffee, not one personal item. Nothing. And when Marcus had followed her, because of course he had, because he was incapable of just trusting anyone, and confronted her at the orphanage, she'd looked at him with such disappointment, such hurt, that it had shattered something fundamental inside him. "You tested me," she'd said, her warm brown eyes filled with tears. "After 6 months of me showing you every day that I care about you as a person, not a paycheck, you still couldn't believe it. You still had to test me like I was some kind of experiment." She'd been right. Of course she'd been right. And somehow, impossibly, she'd forgiven him. Had given him another chance. Had agreed to marry him when he'd proposed 2 months later in the same garden at Harbor Lights, where he'd confronted her, where he'd finally learned what it meant to let someone in. But now, standing at his own engagement party, watching Elena speak to this boy who looked so much like Christopher that Marcus felt like he might shatter into 1,000 pieces, doubt crept back in like poison. What if he'd been wrong about her? What if this whole thing, the orphanage, the children, the seemingly selfless behavior, what if it had all been a long game? What if Elena had known exactly what would appeal to a grieving father, and she'd played her role perfectly? The boy laughed at something Elena said, and the sound cut through Marcus's thoughts like a knife through silk. Because that laugh, that specific, unguarded, joyful laugh, sounded exactly like Christopher's laugh had sounded on Saturday mornings when they'd made pancakes together. Before Marcus had let his work consume everything, before the accident that had taken his son away forever, Marcus felt his hands start to shake, felt the champagne slosh dangerously close to the rim of the glass. Felt his carefully controlled exterior start to crack. He had to know, had to understand what was happening here. Why this boy who looked like Christopher was at his engagement party. Why Elena had never mentioned him before. Why she was speaking to him with such obvious affection and familiarity. Marcus set down his champagne glass on the nearest surface, a marble column that probably cost more than a car, and started walking toward Elena and the boy, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the string quartet, over the murmured conversations, over everything. He had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. 3 months earlier. I can't do this anymore, Daniel. Marcus Hartwell threw his custom-tailored blazer across the leather couch in his Boston penthouse with more force than necessary, watching it land in a crumpled heap that would have made his dry cleaner weep. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows 40 stories below, a galaxy of lights that represented all the success he'd achieved and none of the happiness he'd lost. His tie hung loose around his neck, and there was a distinct smudge of lipstick on his collar. Not his own, obviously, that made him want to burn the entire shirt, possibly the entire outfit, maybe his whole wardrobe out of pure frustration. Daniel Chen set down his ever-present tablet with the kind of practiced calm that came from 8 years of managing Marcus Hartwell's various crises, both professional and personal. He'd seen Marcus at his best and his worst, had been there through the loss of Christopher, through the dark years that followed, through every bad decision and every moment of grief-fueled rage. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, "it was just dinner." "Just dinner?" Marcus spun around, running both hands through his hair until it stood up in ways that would have horrified his stylist. "She took a selfie with the lobster, Daniel. The lobster. Then called me her favorite almost, whatever the hell that means, and tried to toast to what could have been with a $200 bottle of Dom Perignon while staring meaningfully into my eyes like we were in some kind of romantic movie instead of a business dinner that she somehow turned into a therapy session about her feelings." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that meant his assistant was trying very hard not to smile. "I see. Do you?" Marcus demanded, pacing now, unable to stand still. "Do you see? Because I'm not sure I do anymore. Am I a human being to these people? Or am I just a walking, talking portfolio, a LinkedIn profile with legs, a bank account that occasionally needs feeding?" "Sir, don't answer that." Marcus cut him off, dropping into one of the leather armchairs positioned to provide the best view of the city. Not that he was looking at the view. He was staring at nothing, seeing everything. "They don't see me, Daniel. None of them do. They see the penthouse, the private jet, the net worth that gets reported in Forbes magazine. They see what I can do for them, how I can advance their careers or fund their lifestyles, or provide them with access to other wealthy people." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "I could be anyone behind this bank account. I could be a complete monster, and they wouldn't care as long as the credit card still worked. Hell, I could be nobody, just an empty suit with a signature, and it wouldn't make a difference to any of them." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Marcus appreciated that about him. Unlike most people in Marcus's life, Daniel actually thought before he spoke, actually considered his words instead of just saying whatever he thought Marcus wanted to hear. "Sir," Daniel finally said, his tone gentle, "perhaps you need some distance, a vacation, time to clear your head and gain some perspective." "I don't need a vacation," Marcus shot back, but there was less heat in his voice now, more exhaustion. "I need to know if there's anyone in my life who actually gives a damn about Marcus Hartwell the person, not Marcus Hartwell the balance sheet. I need to know if I'm completely alone in this world, or if there's someone, somewhere, who would still care about me if I lost everything tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city, 40 stories below, and the distant sound of a siren somewhere in the Boston night. And then, like all of Marcus's worst ideas, it came to him in a flash of inspiration that felt brilliant in the moment and would probably prove to be catastrophic in retrospect. "I'm going to run an experiment," Marcus announced, sitting up straighter, energy suddenly crackling through him like electricity through a wire. Daniel's expression didn't change, but Marcus had known him long enough to recognize the warning signs. The slight stiffening of his shoulders, the careful way he set down his tablet, the tiny twitch in his left eye that only appeared when Marcus was about to do something particularly inadvisable. "Sir," Daniel said carefully, each word precisely measured. "Every single time you use the phrase, 'I'm going to run an experiment,' someone ends up either crying, calling their lawyer, or both. Sometimes also calling the media. Once, memorably, all three." "This time will be different," Marcus insisted, already pulling out his phone, his mind 3 steps ahead, seeing the whole plan unfold before him like a chess game he was setting up piece by piece. "That's what you said last time," Daniel pointed out. "And I was right. That experiment yielded very valuable data. That experiment resulted in 3 separate HR complaints and cost the company $75,000 in settlements." "Worth it for the information gained," Marcus said dismissively, already scrolling through his contacts. "This will be different. Personal, not professional. No HR implications whatsoever." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, and Marcus recognized it as his assistant's way of praying for patience. "What exactly are you planning, sir?" Marcus looked up from his phone, his eyes bright with the kind of manic energy that preceded either brilliant innovations or spectacular disasters. "I'm going to give 3 women in my life a black credit card. Unlimited spending power. No restrictions. No instructions. No rules. Just complete freedom to do whatever they want for 3 days. And then you're going to judge them based on their choices?" Daniel said flatly. "I'm going to observe them," Marcus corrected. "There's a significant difference between judging and observing. One is subjective and emotional. The other is objective and scientific. That is absolutely not the difference, sir, and you know it." But Marcus was already pacing again, his mind working through the logistics. Victoria Sterling. Elegant, sophisticated, always talking about art investments and charitable foundations and making strategic connections. She's been positioning herself as potential wife material for the past year. Let's see what she does when she actually has access to real money without having to ask me for it first. Daniel made a note on his tablet, his expression suggesting he was documenting evidence for future legal proceedings. "And the other 2 test subjects?" "Isabel Chen," Marcus continued, barely pausing to breathe. "My corporate strategist. Brilliant woman. Scary smart. Always 3 moves ahead in every business situation. She keeps telling me she knows exactly how to maximize resource allocation for optimal outcomes. Let's test that theory when she's allocating my resources." "Uh-huh." Daniel's stylus moved across his tablet. "Anyone else you'd like to psychologically manipulate today?" Marcus stopped pacing, his gaze drifting toward the open kitchen area, where a soft, off-key humming drifted through the otherwise silent penthouse. The scent of something baking, something warm and slightly burnt, if he was being honest, filled the air with a homey quality that seemed at odds with the sleek, modern minimalism of his designer living space. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. Daniel's head snapped up, his carefully neutral expression cracking slightly. "Elena? Sir, you want to test your housekeeper? The woman who threatened to quit because I reorganized her spice cabinet?" Marcus said, still looking toward the kitchen. "The one who hums Beatles songs off-key while she works and calls me sir, in that tone that sounds like she's either making fun of me or praying for my soul. I can never tell which. Who leaves me passive-aggressive notes about my eating habits and argues with me about dishwasher loading techniques like it's a matter of national importance. Sir, she's the only person in my life who's never asked me for anything, Daniel," Marcus continued, his voice taking on an intensity that surprised even him. "Never looked at me like I was a winning lottery ticket. Never calculated what she could get from me or how close she needed to position herself for maximum advantage. She argues with me about burnt garlic bread, for God's sake. When was the last time anyone argued with me about something that trivial? Something that real? Last week when I told you that cryptocurrency investment was a terrible idea," Daniel pointed out. "That's different. That's business. That's your job." Marcus waved this away impatiently. "I'm talking about someone who treats me like I'm just a normal person. Someone who doesn't care that I'm worth billions. Someone who's just as likely to yell at me for leaving dishes in the sink as she is to actually do her job and clean them." Daniel set down his tablet with a soft click that somehow sounded like disapproval. Sir, with all due respect, which given how long I've worked for you, is considerable but not unlimited, this is a terrible idea. Most of my best ideas start out sounding terrible, Marcus countered. That's not the endorsement you seem to think it is. Daniel said dryly, Sir, you're talking about testing the loyalty and character of 3 women by giving them unlimited money and watching what they do with it. Do you not see how problematic that is on multiple levels? I see how it's efficient, Marcus replied. Actions speak louder than words, Daniel. Everyone can say they're genuine. Everyone can claim they care about me for who I am, rather than what I have. But when given unlimited resources with no oversight or consequences, people reveal their true nature. They show you who they really are. Or, Daniel said carefully, you could just try trusting people like a normal human being. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Trust is a luxury I lost the ability to afford 8 years ago. The mention of Christopher hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Daniel had been there in the aftermath of the accident, had seen Marcus at his absolute lowest, had watched him build those walls 1 brick at a time until he was completely isolated behind them. Sir, Daniel tried again, his voice gentler now. I understand that Christopher's death made it difficult for you to trust people. But isolating yourself behind tests and experiments isn't the answer. It's just another form of running away. I'm not running away, Marcus insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm being strategic, careful, protecting myself from people who would use me. By using them first, Daniel finished. The words hit harder than Marcus wanted to admit. He turned away, looking out at the city again. At all those lights representing all those lives, all those people going about their business, most of whom would never have to question whether someone loved them for themselves or for their bank balance. Just set it up, Marcus said finally, his voice flat. 3 black cards, 3 women, 3 days. I want to see who they really are when there are no rules and no consequences. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. A sound Marcus had heard many times over their 8 years together, usually right before his assistant enabled whatever terrible decision Marcus was insisting on making. Very well, sir, Daniel said, picking up his tablet again. I'll contact the bank first thing in the morning. Though, for the record, I want it noted that I advise strongly against this course of action. Noted, Marcus said. But he wasn't really listening anymore. He was already imagining it. The 3 black cards, sleek and weighted with possibility. The 3 women, each faced with unlimited resources and zero oversight. The choices they would make. The truths they would reveal about themselves through their actions. He told himself he was looking for clarity, for definitive proof of who he could trust and who he couldn't. But deep down, in a place he didn't like to examine too closely, Marcus knew what he was really hoping for. He was hoping that at least one of them, preferably Elena, if he was being honest with himself, would surprise him, would choose differently, would show him that there were still good people in the world who cared about more than money and status and what they could take from him. He was hoping to be proven wrong about his cynical worldview, even though he was terrified of what it would mean if he was. To be continued. Total word count for Part 1, 3,007 words. Part 2, The Discovery. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only autumn in Boston could provide. Marcus Hartwell sat at his desk in his home office, looking out at a city that was just beginning to wake up, and felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread churning in his stomach. 3 black envelopes sat before him, arranged in a perfect row on the mahogany surface. Names written in silver ink on heavy cardstock that screamed wealth and exclusivity. Victoria Sterling, Isabel Chen, Elena Carter. Inside each envelope was a black American Express Centurion card, the kind that had no preset spending limit, that opened doors other credit cards couldn't even find. That came with a 24-hour concierge service ready to fulfill practically any request short of actual illegality. Marcus picked up the first envelope, feeling its weight in his hand. Such a small thing, such a simple object, and yet it represented unlimited power, unlimited possibility, unlimited temptation. It was, he thought with grim humor, the perfect test. "Sir, your first appointment is in an hour," Daniel said from the doorway, tablet in hand as always, looking crisp and professional despite the early hour. "Victoria Sterling asked if you were free for coffee before the quarterly board meeting. I've taken the liberty of having it sent up from that cafe she likes, the one with the $18 lattes." Of course Victoria had asked. Victoria Sterling never missed an opportunity to position herself in Marcus's orbit, to remind him of her existence, to present herself as the perfect companion for a man of his wealth and status. She was 52, elegant in that timeless way that came from a combination of excellent genes and expensive maintenance. Old Boston money, married to new real estate empire money. The kind of woman who understood the rules of their social stratum and played the game with masterful precision. "Send her in," Marcus said, picking up Victoria's envelope. "And Daniel, make sure the others get delivered today. Isabel at her office this afternoon. Elena," he paused. "Elena here at home this evening." Daniel nodded, but his expression held a warning that Marcus chose to ignore. They'd already had this argument last night. There was no point rehashing it. Victoria Sterling entered Marcus's home office like she was gracing it with her presence. She wore a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her already impressive height. Her dark hair was pulled back in the kind of effortless chignon that actually required significant effort, and her makeup was flawless in that way that made it look like she wasn't wearing any makeup at all. "Marcus, darling," she said, her voice warm and cultured, carrying just a hint of her finishing school education. "You wanted to see me?" Marcus stood, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Always the gentleman, even when he was conducting what amounted to a psychological experiment on his guests. "Victoria, thank you for coming early." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," she said, settling gracefully into the chair, crossing her legs at the ankle in that particular way that suggested extensive etiquette training. "You know I always have time for you, Marcus. But especially when it means avoiding Harold Patterson's interminable stories about his golf game at the board meeting." Marcus allowed himself a small smile at that. Harold Patterson was indeed insufferable about his golf game. "I have something for you," he said, sliding the black envelope across his desk. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose with interest. "A gift? Marcus, how thoughtful. Though I have to ask, are we celebrating something? Have I forgotten an important date?" Her tone was light, teasing, but Marcus caught the calculating look in her eyes. She was already running through possibilities, trying to determine what this meant, what angle she should take. "No special occasion," Marcus said smoothly. "Consider it a thank you for all the work you've done on the board, for your insights and your dedication to the company." Victoria opened the envelope slowly, with the kind of deliberate care that suggested she was savoring the moment. When she saw the black card inside, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe satisfaction. It was gone too quickly for Marcus to identify with certainty. "Marcus," she said carefully, turning the card over in her perfectly manicured hands, "this is incredibly generous. But I have to confess, I'm a bit confused about the nature of this gift. Is this a company card for business expenses?" "It's yours," Marcus said, watching her face carefully. "Personal, no strings attached. Use it however you'd like for the next 3 days. Consider it a token of appreciation." Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the distinct impression she could see right through him. She hadn't built a real estate empire by missing subtext or failing to read between the lines. 3 days, she repeated softly, almost to herself. Then her expression shifted into that warm, gracious smile she'd perfected. "Well, how could I possibly refuse such a thoughtful gesture? Thank you, Marcus, truly." She slipped the card into her designer purse, Hermes, if Marcus wasn't mistaken, which retailed for about $12,000, and stood. "I should probably get to that board meeting before Harold starts without me. You know how he gets when he has an audience." After she left, Marcus stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Boston as it came fully awake below him. Somewhere down there, millions of people were making choices, living lives that didn't revolve around tests and suspicions and the constant question of who was real and who was performing. He wondered what that felt like. Isabel Chen arrived at exactly 2 p.m. because Isabel was never early and never late. Punctuality was just one of many things she'd optimized in her life, through careful analysis and strategic planning. She was 38, razor sharp, with the kind of analytical mind that could dismantle a competitor's business strategy in under 10 minutes and propose 3 better alternatives before anyone else had finished their coffee. She'd saved Northtech Solutions approximately $40 million over the 3 years she'd worked there, mostly by identifying inefficiencies that everyone else had accepted as inevitable and systematically eliminating them. Marcus valued her precisely because she didn't care about making friends or being liked. She cared about results, about data, about measurable outcomes. "Marcus," she said as she entered his office, not waiting for an invitation before sitting down in the chair across from his desk. She carried a tablet, naturally, and wore what Marcus had come to think of as her uniform. Dark slacks, crisp white shirt, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Daniel said you wanted to see me. I have 20 minutes before my next meeting." Of course she did. Isabel's calendar was a work of art in efficiency. Every minute accounted for and optimized for maximum productivity. Marcus slid the second black envelope across his desk without preamble. "I have something for you." Isabel picked up the envelope, weighed it in her hand with the precision of someone calculating its exact mass, then opened it with the same economical movements she applied to everything. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourishes. When she saw the black card inside, her expression didn't change at all. She simply looked at it, turned it over once, then looked back up at Marcus with those dark, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "What's this for?" she asked bluntly. No social niceties, no pretense. That was another thing Marcus appreciated about Isabel. She didn't waste time with games. "Does it need to be for something?" Marcus replied, genuinely curious about her response. "In my experience," Isabel set the card down on the desk between them, creating a small but deliberate distance. "Yes, everything has a purpose. Every action has an underlying motivation. So let me rephrase. What are you testing, Marcus?" He almost laughed. Of course, Isabel saw right through it. "Maybe I'm just being generous," he offered. "You're never just anything," Isabel countered, leaning back in her chair and folding her arms. "You don't make random gestures. You don't give away unlimited credit without a reason. So I'll ask again, what's the real purpose here?" Marcus studied her for a moment, impressed despite himself. 3 days, he said finally. "Use it however you want. No restrictions, no requirements. I'm curious to see what you do with complete financial freedom." "Ah," Isabel nodded slowly, and Marcus could practically see the gears turning in her head, analyzing the situation from multiple angles. "A behavioral study. Interesting approach, though ethically dubious. Are there other participants? I'm not answering that." "Which is an answer in itself," Isabel said, picking up the card again. She tapped it against the desk thoughtfully. 3 days of unlimited resources. And you'll be monitoring my purchases, I assume? Analyzing my choices. Drawing conclusions about my character based on my spending habits. Something like that. Isabel slipped the card into her briefcase with the same efficient movements she used for everything. "Well, this should be interesting. For both of us, I imagine." She stood, checking her watch. 18 minutes until my next meeting. "Thank you for the gift, Marcus. Or the test. Or whatever this is." "You're welcome," Marcus said. "Oh, and Marcus?" She paused at the door, looking back at him. "For the record, if this is about determining who's actually loyal to you versus who's just interested in your money, you're going about it entirely wrong. But I suppose you'll figure that out eventually." After she left, Marcus sat at his desk and stared at the third envelope. Elena's envelope. The one he was least sure about. The one that made his stomach twist with anxiety he didn't want to examine too closely. Because unlike Victoria or Isabel, he actually cared what Elena thought of him. Cared in a way that made this whole experiment feel less like strategic research and more like emotional self-sabotage. Elena Carter didn't arrive that evening. She was already there, had been there since early afternoon, moving through his penthouse with her characteristic energy, humming something that might have been Let It Be if the Beatles had been tone-deaf. Marcus found her in the kitchen, naturally, surrounded by what looked like the aftermath of a small baking war. Flour dusted every available surface. Mixing bowls were stacked precariously in the sink. Something in the oven was producing a smell that was either genius or disaster, possibly both simultaneously. "Mr. Hartwell," she said without turning around, somehow knowing he was there even though he hadn't made a sound. "If you're here to tell me that the oven is making those weird coughing noises again, I already know. I've named him Harold. He's temperamental, but we're working through it." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. Elena was 33, with dark hair that was currently pulled into a messy bun that had given up on staying neat hours ago. She wore jeans and an old t-shirt under her flour-dusted apron, and there was a smudge of what looked like chocolate on her cheek. She looked absolutely nothing like the polished, perfectly presented women who usually populated Marcus's life. She looked, he thought, real. "Elena," he said quietly. She finally turned around, surprised by his tone. "Oh, you sound serious. Am I fired? Because I promised that smell is supposed to be there." "Probably. Maybe. Okay, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm committed to this baking experiment, and we'll find out together." "You're not fired," Marcus said, pulling the envelope from his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." Elena wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, frowning. "For me, Mr. Hartwell? Did I forget to clean something? Because I swear that stain in your study was there when I started this morning. It wasn't." "You didn't forget anything," Marcus interrupted, holding out the envelope. "This is a gift. A thank you." Elena took the envelope carefully, like it might explode. She looked at it, looked at him, looked back at the envelope. "This is weird," she announced. "This is very weird. You're being weird." "Just open it," Marcus said, fighting the urge to smile. Elena opened the envelope slowly, peering inside like she expected something to jump out at her. When she saw the black card, her eyes went comically wide. "Mr. Hartwell, what is this?" "It's a credit card." "I can see that, but why are you giving me a credit card? Are you dying? Is this a Make-A-Wish thing? Should I call Daniel?" "I'm not dying," Marcus said, and this time he did smile. "It's yours to use however you want, for 3 days. There's no spending limit." Elena stared at the card like he'd just handed her a live snake. "I'm sorry, there's no what now?" "No spending limit. Buy whatever you want, go wherever you want. It's yours." "But..." Elena looked genuinely distressed now. "Mr. Hartwell, I made you banana bread yesterday and it was burnt, like really burnt. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Should I be worried about your mental state? Do billionaires have like breakdowns where they give away credit cards?" Despite everything, the test, the anxiety, the complicated motivations, Marcus laughed. Really laughed, the kind of genuine laughter he couldn't remember experiencing in months. "I'm fine, Elena. Just take it. Use it. Enjoy it. But what am I supposed to do with unlimited money for 3 days? I mean, this is insane. You know this is insane, right?" "Just trust me," Marcus said, even as a voice in his head pointed out the irony of asking her to trust him while he was literally testing whether she was trustworthy. Elena looked at the card for a long moment. Then she looked back at Marcus, and something in her expression made his breath catch. It was a look that saw right through him, that understood more than he wanted anyone to understand. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm going on record as saying this is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. And I once had to cat sit for a woman who had 17 cats and a very specific feeding schedule." "Noted," Marcus said. He left her there, surrounded by her baking chaos, holding that black card like it was a puzzle she was trying to solve, and he went to his office to begin the wait. 48 hours later, Marcus sat in his home office with a glass of very expensive scotch that he wasn't actually drinking, staring at the tablet Daniel had placed on his desk, with the air of someone delivering bad news. "Tell me," Marcus said, even though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Daniel adjusted his glasses, a nervous tell Marcus had learned to recognize over their years together. Victoria Sterling rented the presidential suite at the Riverside Hotel for a weekend wellness retreat. 5-star spa treatments, personal shopping session at Chanel and Dior, private art viewing at a gallery that's not open to the public, and a catered dinner party for 20 of Boston's most influential business leaders. Total spending, $94,317. Marcus nodded slowly. Predictable. Elegant. Exactly what he'd expected from Victoria, using his resources to advance her own social and business interests while maintaining the veneer of sophistication. Isabel Chen, Daniel continued, purchased a complete home office upgrade with the latest technology, ergonomic furniture, 3 additional monitors, professional-grade video conferencing equipment. She also bought materials for what appears to be a startup company, office supplies, software licenses, legal consultation fees, and she donated $10,000 to a scholarship fund for women in STEM fields. Total, $67,892. Also, predictable, strategic, practical. Isabel had essentially used his test as seed funding for her own entrepreneurial venture. Marcus had to admire the efficiency of it, even if it proved she was already planning her exit from his company. "And Elena?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. Daniel was silent for a moment, looking at his tablet with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "Sir, Elena's spending pattern is unusual." "Define unusual." "Neighborhood grocery store in Dorchester. Bulk purchases of rice, beans, pasta, canned goods. Sam's Club, paper goods, toiletries, basic necessities. A children's clothing store. 37 separate transactions for winter coats in various sizes. An art supply store, a used bookstore, a toy store, but specifically the section with discounted and clearance items. And," Daniel scrolled down, 300 hot dogs from a wholesale food distributor. Marcus set down his untouched scotch very carefully. "I'm sorry, did you say 300 hot dogs?" 300, sir. Also several hundred balloons, face paint, craft supplies, and a rental van scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at Harbor Lights Children's Home in South Boston." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at Daniel, trying to process this information. "Harbor Lights, that's an orphanage." "Yes, sir. They're having their monthly community day tomorrow. According to their website, it's a celebration for the children who live there and kids from the surrounding neighborhood. Free food, activities, entertainment. Elena appears to have spent your money funding the entire event." Marcus felt something cold and complicated settling in his chest. How much did she spend on herself? Daniel looked uncomfortable. "Nothing, sir." "Nothing?" "Not a single purchase for personal use. She bought coffee this morning and paid for it herself with cash. Bought lunch from a food truck and used her own debit card. Even when she took the van to Harbor Lights to deliver supplies yesterday, she paid for her own gas. So she spent $30,000 of my money. On children, sir. Specifically on children who have nothing." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't what he'd expected. Wasn't what he'd planned for. Victoria had proven she was strategic and self-serving. Isabel had proven she was ambitious and already planning her next move. But Elena? Elena had proven something he hadn't wanted to confront. "I need to see her," Marcus said suddenly, standing up. "Sir, it's nearly midnight. I need to see what she's doing with that money. Tomorrow, at Harbor Lights." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Sir, with all due respect, spying on your housekeeper at a children's charity event is perhaps crossing a line." "I'm not spying," Marcus protested. "I'm conducting observational research." "Those are the same thing, sir." "They're completely different things." "They are not." But Marcus was already grabbing his jacket, already planning his route, already deciding which car to take. The SUV, definitely. Something that wouldn't stand out in a working-class Boston neighborhood, because he had to see this for himself, had to understand what Elena was doing, had to know if this was real or just another performance, albeit a more elaborate one than he'd anticipated. He had to know the truth, even if deep down he was terrified of what that truth might be. To be continued. Total word count for Part 2, 3,015 words. Running total, 6,022 words. Remaining for Part 3, 3,000 words. Part 3, the truth. The black SUV idled 3 cars behind the rental van, and Marcus Hartwell felt absolutely ridiculous. He was 52 years old, worth $3.8 billion. He'd negotiated hostile takeovers with Fortune 500 companies. He'd addressed the United Nations on technology ethics. He'd been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine 3 separate times. And here he was, sitting in a parking lot in South Boston at 9 in the morning, following his housekeeper like some cut-rate private investigator in a bad television drama. "Sir," Daniel said from the passenger seat, his voice carrying that particular tone of patient disapproval he'd perfected over their 8 years together. "I feel obligated to point out that this crosses several ethical boundaries that even you usually respect." "Noted," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the van as it pulled into a parking lot beside a 3-story brick building that had clearly seen better days. "And also possibly legal boundaries." "Also noted. And that if Miss Carter discovers you followed her here, she will almost certainly quit. Immediately, possibly after throwing something at you, because I've seen her throw a spatula when you ate cookies before dinner, and her aim was disturbingly accurate." Marcus finally glanced at his assistant. "Are you finished?" "Not remotely, sir, but I'm choosing to prioritize efficiency over completeness in my objections." The rental van had stopped now, parked in front of a building with faded paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Harbor Lights Children's Home." The playground equipment looked like it dated from the 1980s, held together with determination and possibly prayers. Marcus felt something cold and uncomfortable settle in his chest. An orphanage. Elena had spent his money at an orphanage. He watched as Elena climbed out of the van, and what happened next made his breath catch in his throat. Children materialized from everywhere, from the building's entrance, from around corners, from what seemed like thin air. They swarmed toward Elena like she was the Pied Piper or Santa Claus or some combination of both, shouting, laughing, pulling at her hands and her jacket. And Elena was laughing too, that bright, unguarded laugh he'd only heard when she thought no one was listening, when she was alone in the kitchen humming Beatles songs and didn't know he could hear her. "Sir," Daniel said quietly, urgently, "maybe we should," but Marcus couldn't move, couldn't speak, because standing in the doorway of the building was a woman who looked to be in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, sensible shoes, clipboard in hand, watching the chaos with the patient smile of someone who'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. And running toward Elena, arms outstretched, dark curls bouncing with every step, was a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Marcus's hands went completely numb on the steering wheel. The boy looked exactly like Christopher. Same dark curls that no amount of combing could ever tame. Same skinny frame that was all knees and elbows and boundless. Chaotic energy. Same wide smile, showing that slight gap between his front teeth. Even the way he ran. That particular combination of enthusiasm and lack of coordination that small children possess was exactly how Christopher used to run. Before the accident. Before the funeral with its tiny casket, before Marcus had learned that all the money in the world couldn't buy back a single second with someone you loved. "Sir?" Daniel's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sir, are you all right? You've gone very pale." Marcus couldn't respond, could only watch as the boy crashed into Elena's arms, and she spun him around, both of them laughing, and for one perfect, terrible, devastating moment. Marcus was back in his living room 8 years ago, watching Christopher run toward him after school, shouting about dinosaurs or spaceships or whatever had captured his 6-year-old imagination that particular day, before everything had ended. "Sir, I really think we should leave," Daniel said, his hand on the door handle now, clearly preparing to either drive them away himself or physically drag Marcus from the vehicle if necessary. "Sir, this isn't," but Marcus was already opening the door, already getting out, already walking toward Elena and the boy, and the truth he both desperately wanted and desperately feared. He had to know, had to understand, even if it destroyed him. Elena saw him first. She was in the middle of organizing what looked like a small army of excited children, directing them with the kind of natural authority that suggested she'd done this many times before. When she glanced up and froze mid-gesture, her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then, worst of all, something that looked like disappointment so profound it made Marcus's chest physically hurt. "Mr. Hartwell." She set down the balloon she'd been holding and walked toward him with the kind of deliberate purpose that people usually reserved for confrontations. "What are you doing here?" Marcus's practiced speeches, his carefully prepared explanations, all evaporated in the face of that disappointment. "I was concerned," he managed to say, and even to his own ears it sounded weak. "Concerned." Elena's voice was flat. "About what exactly?" "The credit card, the purchases. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't stealing from you." She crossed her arms, and Marcus realized he'd never actually seen Elena truly angry before. Annoyed, yes. Exasperated, frequently. But not this. Not fire in her eyes and steel in her voice. That I wasn't running some kind of elaborate scam? That the housekeeper couldn't possibly have legitimate reasons for buying 300 hot dogs? Elena, that's not what I... Because let me tell you something, Mr. Hartwell. She took a step closer, and Marcus actually took a step back, which he suspected she noticed and took grim satisfaction in. I have worked for you for 6 months. 6 months of cleaning your house and cooking your meals and listening to you pace at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep. 6 months of pretending not to notice when you stand in your study, staring at Christopher's photo like if you look long enough you can bring him back. Marcus felt like she'd physically struck him. And in all that time, Elena continued, her voice shaking slightly now, but not with anger, with hurt. Did I ever ask you for anything? Did I ever look at your bank account like it was a prize to be won? Could I ever treat you like anything other than a man who desperately needed someone to tell him when his tie didn't match his shirt and his coffee was terrible? No, Marcus said quietly, you didn't. So what made you think that giving me a credit card would suddenly turn me into someone who'd spend it on myself? What made you think, her voice cracked, what made you think I'd betray your trust like that? The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true and devastating. You're right, Marcus said, and the admission felt like something breaking open inside his chest. You're absolutely right. I tested you because I've forgotten how to trust anyone. I've forgotten how to see people as anything other than threats or transactions. Christopher's death taught me that loving people means risking loss, and I decided that the only way to be safe was to never trust anyone at all. That's not safety, Mr. Hartwell, Elena said softly, and somehow her gentleness was worse than her anger. That's just a different kind of death. Before Marcus could respond, the woman with the clipboard approached, looking between them with obvious concern. Elena, is everything all right here? This is Marcus Hartwell, Elena said, not taking her eyes off Marcus. He's my employer. Marcus, this is Patricia Wu. She runs Harbor Lights. Patricia's handshake was firm, assessing. Mr. Hartwell, I've heard a great deal about you. Nothing good, I'm sure, Marcus managed. Actually, Patricia said, her expression warming slightly. All good. Elena talks about you constantly. Says you're brilliant but clueless, generous but guarded, and that you make the worst coffee she's ever tasted in her entire life. Despite everything, Marcus glanced at Elena, who was suddenly finding the balloon arrangement fascinating. Well, Marcus said, at least 2 of those things are definitely true. If you're here to help, Patricia continued, gesturing at the chaos around them, we could certainly use the extra hands. We've got 50 children who need supervision, 300 hot dogs that need cooking, and approximately 0 adults who know how to work the face painting station. I don't know how to face paint, Marcus admitted. Neither do I, Patricia said cheerfully. That's what makes it an adventure. 2 hours later, Marcus Hartwell, billionaire tech founder, Forbes cover subject, man who'd address the United Nations, was sitting on the ground, trying to paint what was supposed to be a butterfly on a 6-year-old girl's cheek, but looked more like a moth that had lost a fight with a windshield. That's not a butterfly, the girl informed him critically. Butterflies are just pretty moths, Marcus tried. That's not even remotely true. How old are you again? 6, but I know things. I don't doubt that, Marcus said, and meant it. The girl wandered off to show her friends her questionable butterfly, and Marcus found himself face to face with the boy. The one with Christopher's curls, and Christopher's eyes, and Christopher's gap-toothed smile. Up close, the resemblance was even more devastating. The same way of tilting his head when he was curious. The same slight bounce in his step, like he couldn't quite contain all his energy. The same everything. Hi, the boy said. I'm Leo. Marcus's throat closed completely, opened again with effort. Hi, Leo. I'm Marcus. Are you Elena's boyfriend? What? No, I'm her employer. I pay her to work for me. Leo frowned. That's boring. You should be her boyfriend. She talks about you all the time. She does? Yeah, she says you're smart but sad, and that you don't eat enough vegetables. Also, your coffee is really bad. Like, Really, really bad. Leo climbed onto the bench beside him without invitation. Why are you sad? The question, delivered with a casual brutality only children could manage, hit Marcus like a physical blow. I lost someone, Marcus said quietly, surprised to find himself answering honestly. A long time ago. Someone very important to me. Who? My son. He was about your age. Leo was quiet for a moment, swinging his legs, and Marcus prepared himself for the inevitable uncomfortable questions or awkward sympathy. Instead, Leo said, I lost my mom and dad too. Car accident. That's why I'm here. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Felt all the air leave his lungs at once. I'm so sorry, Leo. It's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but Patricia says everyone loses people, and that's part of life. She says the important thing is finding new people to love. Leo looked up at him with Christopher's eyes, except they weren't Christopher's eyes. They were Leo's eyes, belonging to this child who was his own person with his own loss and his own courage. Have you found new people to love? The question was so simple, so direct, so impossible to answer. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Maybe I'm trying to. You should try harder, Leo advised, with the confidence of someone who absolutely knew better than the adults around him. Elena's really nice. She makes terrible cookies, but she's nice. You should ask her to be your girlfriend. And also maybe learn to make better coffee, because everyone says yours is really bad. Despite everything, the test, the betrayal of trust, the complicated grief and fear and hope tangled together in his chest, Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the second time in as many days, and both times had been because of Elena. I'll work on that, Marcus promised. Good. Leo jumped off the bench. I'm gonna go get a hot dog. You want one? Sure. As Leo ran off, Elena sat down beside Marcus, handing him a bottle of water without a word. They sat in silence for a moment, watching children run and play and exist in that particular way children could, fully present in each moment, unaware of how precious and fleeting it all was. He looks like Christopher, Elena finally said, her voice gentle. Marcus's hands trembled slightly on the water bottle. I noticed. Leo came to Harbor Lights 3 years ago. His parents died in a car accident when he was 4. For the first year, he didn't speak at all, just sat in corners and stared at nothing. What changed? Marcus heard himself ask. Time, Patricia, other kids who understood loss, but mostly? Elena turned to look at him. He decided he wanted to live again, even though it hurt, even though his parents were gone. He chose to keep going, to find joy again, to let new people matter to him. He chose to be brave. Marcus understood what she was really saying, what she was really asking. I think about Christopher every single day, he admitted, the words coming easier than he'd expected. What he'd be like now, 14 years old, probably too cool to hug his dad anymore, probably asking for car keys and staying out past curfew. His voice cracked, and I keep thinking that if I'd just left work earlier that day, if I'd picked him up from school myself instead of sending the driver. If I'd been there. Marcus. Elena's hand found his, warm and steady and real. It wasn't your fault. I know that here. Marcus tapped his head. But knowing something and believing it are very different things. I know, Elena said softly. My little sister died when I was 16. Leukemia. I spent years thinking that if I'd been a better sister, if I'd made her laugh more, if I'd loved her harder somehow, maybe she would have fought harder to stay. It took me a decade to realize that love doesn't work that way. That sometimes people leave, and it's not about what we did or didn't do. It just is. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his own grief reflected back, but also something else. Something that looked like hope, like possibility, like the courage to keep living even when it hurt. Is that why you do this? He gestured at the orphanage, at the children. To help kids who've lost what you lost? Partly, Elena admitted. They remind me that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story, that you can build a life after tragedy, that there's still joy to be found if you're brave enough to look for it. She squeezed his hand. And they keep me honest. Kids don't care about your bank account or your resume or your defenses. They just care if you show up. I want to help, Marcus heard himself say. Not just today. I want to actually help. with funding, resources, whatever Patricia and these kids need. Elena's eyes searched his face. Why? Because you were right. I've been living like money is the only currency that matters. But these kids... He watched Leo return with 2 hot dogs, carefully balancing them. They need more than money. They need people who show up. And maybe, his voice dropped, maybe I need to be one of those people. Maybe I need to learn how to be human again. Elena smiled, and it was like sunrise. Marcus Hartwell, volunteering at an orphanage. Your board of directors is going to think you've completely lost your mind. They probably already do. Leo arrived triumphantly with the hot dogs. I got you extra mustard. Thank you, Leo. They sat together, 3 people eating hot dogs in the afternoon sun, and Marcus felt something shift inside himself. Something that felt dangerously close to peace. Epilogue, 6 months later. Marcus stood in front of Harbor Lights, watching as the last construction workers finished installing the sign on the new educational wing. The Christopher Hartwell Learning Center. 3 new classrooms, a library, a computer lab, space for music and art and healing. It's perfect, Elena said beside him, her hand in his. Not his housekeeper anymore. His girlfriend, his partner, the woman who taught him that trust was a choice and love was an act of courage. He would have liked it, Marcus said quietly. Meaning Christopher. Meaning his son, who would always be part of him, but who no longer defined every moment of his existence. He would have loved it, Elena corrected, and he'd be proud of you. Leo came running up, now 8 years old, holding a golden retriever puppy that Patricia had somehow convinced Marcus to fund for the orphanage. Uncle Marcus, Aunt Elena, come see what Biscuit learned. Uncle Marcus, Aunt Elena. The titles still made Marcus's chest feel too full, too tight, too overwhelmingly grateful. They followed Leo inside, into the noise and chaos and beautiful mess of children who needed them. And Marcus thought about his test, about the black credit cards and the women he'd tried to judge. Victoria had revealed she was strategic and self-serving, exactly as expected. Isabel had proven she was ambitious and ready to move on, which Marcus respected even as she became his competitor. Both had shown him exactly who they were, and he'd learned to accept that and adjust his expectations accordingly. But Elena had shown him something else entirely. She'd shown him that some people really did measure wealth in things that couldn't be deposited in banks, in hot dogs for hungry children, in coats for cold winters, in $60 college funds that said, your future matters, in showing up day after day for people who needed someone to care. She'd shown him that his test was the wrong test, that trust wasn't something you earned through trials and challenges. It was something you chose to give, knowing you might get hurt, doing it anyway because the alternative was living half a life. She'd shown him how to be human again. Marcus? Elena tugged his hand. You're thinking too loud again. Sorry, just grateful. For what? For you, for Leo, for all of this. He gestured at the children, at the new building, at the life they'd built together. For teaching me that I was asking the wrong question. What question was that? I was asking, who can I trust, Marcus said, when I should have been asking, how do I become someone worth trusting? Elena smiled and kissed him, right there in front of the children, who immediately made gagging noises because kissing was gross when you were 8. And Marcus thought about Christopher, about how his son would be 16 now if he'd lived, about how grief would always be part of him, would always be a scar he carried, but also about how he was finally learning that carrying grief didn't mean you couldn't also carry joy, that love wasn't a limited resource, that it grew and expanded and made room for new people without diminishing what came before, that 300 hot dogs and a housekeeper who couldn't sing in tune had somehow saved his life. I love you, he told Elena. I know, she replied, even though your coffee is still terrible. I'm working on that. You've been working on that for 6 months. It's not getting better. Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome also didn't produce liquid that could be classified as a chemical weapon. They walked inside together, into their life, into their family, into the beautiful chaos of showing up and staying and choosing love even when it was scary. And Marcus finally understood what Christopher would have wanted for him all along. Not to stop living, not to build walls so high nothing could touch him, but to risk being hurt again, to let people in, to find new people to love while honoring those he'd lost, to be brave enough to stay human.